This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.
Good afternoon, everyone. As agreed at the Assembly's annual meeting on the 10th of May 2024, the Confirmation Hearings Committee is allowed to appoint a chair on a meeting-by-meeting basis for the 24-25 Assembly year. For the first item of business, I will conduct an election for the chair of this meeting in accordance with the GLA's standing orders. In the event of one candidate being nominated, I will declare the nominated candidate chair of the Confirmation Hearings Committee for this meeting. A proposer and seconder is required for each nomination. In the event of two candidates being nominated, I will ask for votes in favour of each candidate. Are there any nominations?
I'd like to nominate Assembly Member Baker.
Thank you, Assembly Member Russell. Does anyone wish to second that?
Yes, thank you. I'd like to second Assemblymember Russell's proposal that Assemblymember Baker should chair this confirmation hearing.
Thank you, Assemblymember Cooper. Are there any other nominations? Then I declare that Assemblymember Baker is elected Chair of the Confirmation Hearings Committee for today's meeting.
Thank you very much, Committee. Thank you. And good afternoon. And can I now welcome everyone to this meeting of the Confirmation Hearings Committee. And if you can all make sure that your electronic devices are switched to silent mode to avoid any interruptions. And can I now ask our clerk, Lauren Harvey, if any apologies have been received for today's meeting?
Thank you, Chair. We've received apologies from Assemblymember Small-Edwards, for whom Assemblymember Cooper is attending as a substitute, and Assemblymember Wilson is joining us remotely.
Thank you. Can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 3 and ask Assembly members if they have any other disclosable pecuniary interests to declare?
Noted. No.
Thank you. Can I now invite Seb Dance to declare any interest relevant to the business of this meeting or in relation to the proposed appointment?
I have none.
Thank you, Seb. And can we now note the membership of the committee as agreed to at the London Assembly's annual meeting on the 10th of May 2024?
Noted.
Can we note the terms of reference as agreed at the London Assembly's annual meeting on the 10th of May 2024?
Noted.
Thank you. And can I welcome Seb Dance to this meeting? Welcome, Seb. So the committee will put in questions to you in relation to your proposed appointment to the Office of Deputy Chair of Transport for London. Can I first ask members to Note the background information circulated within the agenda for the meeting.
Noted.
And note the supplementary information which was received after publication of the agenda, that is Seb Dance's CV and supporting statement and the key issues and priorities for TfL.
Noted.
Thank you. And we'll now move on to the question and answer session. So I'm going to ask the first couple of questions, Seb, and then we will be passing round the committee. So the first question is a lovely generic interview question and asking you what you have brought to the role of Deputy Chair of Transport for London over the last 2 years.
Thank you, Chair, for the question. And if you permit me, by thanking the committee as well for this opportunity to be here. And as a former elected person, I know what stresses and strains election campaigns can put people under. I also know the joy of being elected and, of course, being re-elected. So congratulations to everybody here. It's no small task. It's been an absolute privilege and honour to have been the Deputy Mayor and Deputy Chair of TfL since January 2022. It is a role that I have undertaken with huge passion for transport, yes, but also the things that transport can do for our great city. It's not just about getting people from A to B. It is the very fabric, the skeleton of our city. It impacts the way in which people view the city, whether they live here or whether they are visitors. It is about creating cleaner, safer environments. It's about connecting people and creating growth and opportunities, jobs and expertise. And I've seen for myself the huge array of expertise that we have in the sector, but also the huge array of opportunities that presents for new generations. And of course, it is the catalyst for regeneration and housing across our city. So much of everyday life and improving the lives of every Londoner depends on a good public transport system. And in achieving the things that we've achieved over the last few years, central to that has been building trust and relations. I've got good relations with TfL and its officers, and I've worked well with not just one but two commissioners overseeing the day-to-day transport operations of TfL, but also working closely with all levels of the organisation, managing the risks and the issues as they arise, but also working to the plan to implement the Mayor's transport strategy clearly and effectively, and communicating what we are doing with stakeholders, but also the public as well. I put a huge importance on making that dialogue clear and as transparent as possible, including, of course, with the London Assembly, where I have appeared on a number of occasions before members of this Assembly in different committees, and I place huge importance on the role that this Assembly plays. As I say, I have had experience in elected office, and I understand and appreciate fully the need for public accountability and the importance of the work that you do in connecting Londoners with the institutions that serve Londoners. And I hope that I have played a constructive role with you in working with your constituents on issues that affect them when they're relevant, obviously, to transport. And I've got good relations with the board as well at TfL. The board is a crucial and sometimes unrecognised, more generally, component of TfL's governance. Yes, of course, it's there to support the day-to-day governance, and that is an important statutory role that it performs. But the board members and the committees that they sit on also provide crucial guidance and support to TfL and to me. And I have built a good relationship of trust. And I'd like also to take this opportunity to thank the outgoing board members for all of the friendship, support and advice that they've given me and TfL over the years. And I look forward, subject to your approval, of course, to working with the future board members who will be joining towards the end of the year. I believe I have a strong track record, and forgive me, that might not be the last transport pun you hear today. It's not intentional, but transport being what it is, there are many. We are on track. For example, I have overseen in this role, the implementation of major projects at TfL have been responsible for the delivery of the Elizabeth Line, the Superloop, ULEZ, 4G and 5G on the network, and a quadrupling of the cycling network, and improving links for other aspects of active travel, such as walking and wheeling. And it is so crucial, of course, to remember that the hard work that TfL put in on securing a funding deal was also something that I pay tribute to my predecessor as well for her work on, and something that has played a crucial and central role in all of the work that I've done as both Deputy Mayor and Deputy Chair. The nature of that funding requirement has changed, and I'm sure we'll talk a bit more about that subsequently in the meeting. But the need for good relationships with government, with other stakeholders, to get that funding deal in place and to implement it and to make it work has been crucial. The committee will be aware of my previous work in the European Parliament, combining experience of policy, oversight and relations with large and complex organisations, knowledge as well of transport and its relation with other policy aspects, most notably environment, as I said earlier, housing as well. And I hope that I've been able to demonstrate that those skills that I had in a previous life have indeed served me well over the last 2.5 years.
Thank you. Thanks very much. And we will definitely touch upon many of those themes over the next questions. So you did start to touch on some of the big challenges you've had over the last 2.5 years. So could you outline what you feel have been the main challenges for you as Deputy Chair of Transport for London? You may want to repeat some of the things you've said or expand on them, and how you've overcome these.
Yes, thank you, Chair. People often ask me what I do as Deputy Mayor and Deputy Chair. And I could go into a long list of the various issues and components of the transport network and try and describe them. I'd be here a very long time if I did that. The simple answer that I give is that I am responsible for implementing the Mayor's transport strategy and its target of 80% of all journeys by public and active transport by 2041. That is the target that drives every decision that we make. It is the target that I think about at least 7 times a day. And whenever an issue arises and whenever decisions need to be made, we always measure them against progress towards that target. That is the overarching challenge that I have had as Deputy Chair and that the Board has had in overseeing TfL's operations. Of course, to get to that 80%, you need to have something quite fundamental in place, which is a sustainable, accessible and affordable public transport system. And achieving those 3 pillars is the main challenge that we have. A key issue, of course, for TfL in providing that sustainable, affordable and accessible public transport system is funding. It's the same issue, I should say, as when I started in 2022, but the nature of the funding issues that TfL faces has changed considerably. When I was appointed, TfL was in the process, as you'll remember, of negotiating a funding deal for operational income. This funding deal was essential in order to maintain TfL's day-to-day operations. We all know that TfL is very dependent on fare revenue, and we all know, of course, that during the pandemic, people rightly stayed at home, and we saw a 95% reduction in ridership at one point. That obviously was devastating for TfL's finances, and of course, we had a series of agreements with central government on providing that operational income. Those agreements were essential, and we're very grateful to central government for stepping up. But what we are now in a situation where TfL is, and I believe, and I'm very happy to be corrected on this, I believe there's only one other transport authority in the world that is now self-sufficient on operational income. It's the MTR in Hong Kong, and the other one is TfL. TfL is now self-sufficient on operational income. That means day-to-day things, keeping the lights on, keeping the trains, buses running, keeping the escalators running, paying staff, and so on and so forth. That is a phenomenal achievement, and I'm really proud of the work that TfL and its officers have done, and the Board has done to get us there. We couldn't have done it without a collective effort, and also the support of the Assembly in achieving that, and scrutinising the deals as and when they were agreed has been essential. But we now have a different challenge, It's part of the same problem, and that is that we have not got a long-term funding deal for capital infrastructure. That means things like renewing the fleet, rolling stock, upgrading signalling, putting in much-needed improvements to infrastructure. For example, step-free access. We've gone a long way. A third of all underground stations are now step-free. That's massively up, but it's not enough. There are huge challenges that our network faces. Some of them, if left untouched, will lead to operational problems as well, as the infrastructure ages, as the technology that we have doesn't keep pace with the technology that's available, and people's expectations of what we can deliver will therefore drift. So that is a significant challenge, and my plea to whichever government we see on July the 5th is to please provide us and every regional transport authority in the country with a long-term funding deal so that we know what the envelope is. Frankly, I would rather have a slightly smaller, insufficient envelope that we know about and that we can plan around than not having a long-term deal. And that remains the most significant challenge that we face.
Thanks very much for those answers. And now I'm passing over to Assemblymember Russell.
Thank you, and good afternoon and welcome. So you've touched on the Mayor's transport strategy, and I'm just wondering, what will success look like with respect to the Mayor's transport strategy's three core themes of healthy streets and healthy people, a good public transport experience, and new homes and jobs? And in particular, what are you going to be doing in this role to ensure the success of the Mayor's transport strategy?
Thank you. As I said, the 80% target, I feel like it's almost etched on my brain. It is central to everything, but you're right, you've identified the pillars of the MTS that underpin that target. And of course, there are various ways in which we are working to support those pillars to achieve that 80%. You talk about healthy streets and healthy people. Vision Zero is a fundamental part of delivering a safe network. I'm very, very conscious in all that we do of the need for safety to be paramount. It is emphasised at every single board meeting. It's emphasised at every single board panel and committee as well that safety is TfL's #1 priority, quite rightly. There would never be a situation where an operational decision was taken that overrode the need for safety, and we would rather have a restricted service if it meant dealing with an issue and fixing it rather than continuing with something that needed fixing that did not meet our highest safety standards. Vision Zero is central to that. Vision Zero is zero because, of course, we want 0 deaths and injuries on our network, on our streets, by 2041, and that commitment runs through everything that we do. Every single time there is a fatality or an injury on our network, I remember them. They are always very distressing, of course, and we do everything we can to learn the lessons from incidents and to see whether or not aspects of the infrastructure can be upgraded and improved and so on. That is the #1 commitment that we have. The second aspect is ensuring that the network is as affordable as possible. I'm proud of the fact that we've frozen fares. I'm proud of the fact that we've done that in spite of considerable external pressure not to. And I'm proud of the fact that we have made innovations in the way that we ticket the network. We've seen, for example, innovations like the Hopper fare, which have increased bus ridership, have made people more familiar with the bus network, and have provided millions more passengers with affordable travel. And I want us to continue to innovate things like the Friday Fares Initiative and the Care Leavers Allowance on ways of improving and extending the affordability of the network. And of course, the third aspect is accessibility. making sure that we have as much of the network accessible to as many people as possible. There is no point in having a public transport network unless it is public, and that means overcoming the barriers that, quite frankly, have been in place for too long. We're very lucky to have the world's first metro system, but we obviously would not build it today to the standards that we see, and so of course we're having to retrofit a lot, and that includes not just things like physical changes on step-free access. It doesn't just include issues for neurodivergent people either in terms of the design of the stations, but also things that perhaps we might not consider part of accessibility, but really very much are things like toilet provision as well, which is a crucial, as you know, part of ensuring that the network is available and accessible to everybody. So improving those bread and butter points, increasing people's confidence in the system, that it really is crucial to delivering the pillars of the NTS, and as I say, driving us towards that 80% target.
Thank you. And really good to hear you talking about Vision Zero, and also obviously toilets. I'm always very glad whenever anyone mentions toilets as part of accessibility, because it absolutely is a really fundamental part of accessibility. I just want to circle back to the challenge of Vision Zero, because London missed the target in terms of getting, it was 65% against the 0509 baseline in 2022, and we did miss that. You talked about a safe system, and I think my kind of understanding of TfL is that safe systems absolutely apply on rail and the underground. They are trying to apply that on buses, but I think in terms of people walking and cycling, if one was applying that same systems approach, one would kind of reduce all the speeds down to 15 miles an hour and kind of, take traffic completely out of some roads if we were really seriously trying to get to zero people killed or seriously injured. And I just wonder what you see as, if you could just say a bit more about that challenge of that Vision Zero target, especially for the people who are walking and cycling, who are the most likely to be killed or seriously injured on our roads.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's very many aspects of safety in the public realm, as we know. There are, I think, perhaps people who think that it's inevitable in a city of 9.5 million people in a complex urban environment that injuries will occur. I don't accept that at all. I don't accept that anything that involves serious injury or death is inevitable. Each of these instances has resulted from a series of catastrophic outcomes, that some of which, of course, we can design out in the street environment and so on. You mentioned speed limits. This is an important point, because 20 miles an hour is safer than 30 miles an hour. If you are hit by a car at 20 miles an hour, you are vastly more likely to survive than if you are hit at 30 miles an hour. And I think in an urban environment, the extension of the 20 mile an hour limit across TfL and borough roads, working obviously in collaboration with the boroughs, has been hugely important in ensuring that we do work towards making our goal. When you set a goal of zero deaths and injuries, you obviously have a trajectory to meet. And in many areas we're meeting and exceeding that trajectory, but you're right, in some areas we are behind. And I think it's fair to say that on bus safety in particular, we're slightly behind. And what I would say is that we are world leading in this. There are not many cities that take worldwide that take the kind of action we are in, for example, working with the drivers and the unions to ensure that we provide proper facilities for drivers to ensure that they are not fatigued, working with bus manufacturers to fit safety systems, to look at issues like pedal confusion and to determine the prevalence of such incidences. Again, no other city is really doing this to the extent that we are. And frankly, I would rather we record these instances properly and look at what we can do to bring ourselves back to the right trajectory, rather than pretend it's not happening. And I would like to extend, by the way, my sincerest sympathies to the victims, recent victims of incidents involving the bus network, Catherine Finnegan, Grace McKaylee and Melissa Burr, who tragically lost their lives. And as I say, each and every one of these instances is reported to me. Each and every one of these instances affects me, but it also inspires me to move and to get this target met and of course exceed that target. And that's why working with, as I say, the manufacturers, the drivers, the unions, and I think the general public, to make us all aware of what we can do to look after each other a bit more, I think that's an important part of the equation too.
Thank you, Assemblymember Russell. And now I'm going to hand over to Assemblymember Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just pick up something that you were talking about with Caroline there and having it imprinted throughout your body? Obviously, if I chopped your arm off like a stick of rock, it would say 80%. But do you think it still makes sense, bearing in mind that we signed off that mayoral transport strategy in 2018, which is now 6 years ago? Does it really make sense to still stick with the 2041 date? I have absolutely no problem with the split, the 80%, 20%. I think there will always be some journeys that need to be done by motorised forms that aren't public transport. There will be some people who have to do 100% of their journeys in that way. But I just wonder about the date. Maybe it should come forward.
I thought you were going to say put it back, come forward. That's
no.
Yeah, look,
it seems a long way off.
Yeah, it's a good point. And you mentioned car journeys and the need sometimes for them. I always say that, frankly, some of us will always need to use the car, and all of us will sometimes need to use the car. It is an essential part of our transport mix. Yeah. But by having 80% of public and active travel, of course, it makes the necessary journey so much easier by reducing the congestion. In terms of bringing the date forward, I think in some areas we are ahead of the target, and by areas I mean geographic areas. A big shout out, by the way, to the City of London at 98%. Perhaps slightly easier with the scope of the City of London compared to other local authorities in London, but it does show that it can be done. And there are many parts of inner and central London where they are very, very close to the 80% target indeed. We have a much, much more significant issue with Outer London when it comes to meeting that target.
I'm going to come to that in a minute.
And that stems, I mean, it's obvious, isn't it? It stems from the fact that there is not the same range of options, not the same density of network, and that really is the catalyst behind initiatives like the Superloop and Superloop 2 in looking at new ways of connecting the city. We're all very familiar with the railway termini, the kind of radial model that London in some senses pioneered. This was designing a Metroland and so on. It was designed to get people in and out of the city quickly, and it's been hugely successful, copied worldwide and all the rest of it. But we know that people's habits are changing. We know that people tend to travel more town centre to town centre in Outer London than they used to, but they haven't had the links. And so the car has been the only obvious choice for people, and we recognise that. So providing those links, enhancing the network in Outer London, that really is a major focus.
So if I read between the lines of your answer, I think you're saying it would be really difficult to bring it further forward from 2041 if we don't address some of the gaps in the network. So my question to you is, what improvements have you made to the network over the previous sort of 2 and a bit years? And looking ahead, what more improvements? And I think you've started to answer that question, which is about not just having spokes that go into the centre, but also trying to make some of that connectivity.
That's exactly right. That's the focus, and you read between the lines very well. I think if we do manage to provide a much denser network in Outer London, and by the way, it could be obviously the bus is the core method by which you can do that quickly, but there are obviously other infrastructure projects that we know about that are very important: Bakerloo Line extension, DLR extension, West London Orbital. and other projects.
Being an Assembly member that represents South West London, I'm slightly less interested in those than, there's been a long discussion, and I'm quite sure Assembly Member Garrett is going to say something about this as well, about having the tram extended and getting that proper connectivity going. Now, I was working in Croydon when the tram went in. It was pretty indescribably dreadful when it went in, but it is now an absolute addition to South London, and it's got that linkage as well. It goes east-west. It doesn't just go into the centre of town.
Absolutely. I described it the other day as a sort of prototype for the Superloop. It's absolutely right, and I think tram extension is indeed another one of the projects that will be on that list, as is, by the way, Crossrail 2 and safeguarding the route, because although it might be unthinkable at the moment for the funding to be available, it certainly shouldn't be for us to close off that option for future generations. In terms of what we've done to increase the network and increase the attractiveness of the network, we've frozen fares, as you know, from 2016 to 21. We've done it again in 2024. We have new half-price travel concession on buses and trams for care leavers aged between 18 and 25. The return to financial self-sustainability, or I should say the first time, it's not a return, TfL has not been financially self-sustained in terms of operational income before, means that we can focus on delivering and reinvesting the small surplus that creates back into the network, which of course is also what we do with ULEZ revenue, which has created the largest clean air zone of its kind. It's cut toxic air by almost half in central London. We've introduced the Superloop, of course, and are introducing Superloop 2. We've delivered the Elizabeth line, which creates new connections between East and West London and has resulted in a huge modal shift, by the way, in car traffic from East to West London. A really significant proportion, more than a fifth of all journeys on the Elizabeth line are new, and we assume that they, as in new on public transport, and we assume that they have therefore come from the road. We've delivered significant network improvements on the Northern Line extension, the Bank Station upgrade, London Overground extension to Barking Riverside. The customer and capacity experience has improved with new capacity on the Victoria Line, wheelchair bays on the Bakerloo Line, new trains on the London Overground, 4G and 5G on parts of the network, which obviously reduces the inconvenience that people face compared to being above ground. Delivered 1,400 zero-emission buses. This is now the largest zero-emission bus network in Western Europe. We have quadrupled the cycle network. Let's not forget that the active travel network is a hugely important part of the public transport offering. We have provided 20,000 public charge points for London's EV charging network, which is a third of all the EV chargers in London. Delivered more accessible tube and London Overground stations with more than 200 stations now step-free. We've commissioned a feasibility study into public toilets on the TfL network, backed by a £3 million investment from City Hall. We've launched Places for London, which is TfL's wholly owned commercial property company, which seeks to deliver homes and spaces on the network. This obviously is a huge catalyst for further extensions to the network, and we're looking at ways of delivering that investment even where it's not yet possible to provide extensions to the network. So, for example, in Thamesmead, where the DLR extension is obviously the end goal, we are looking at the bus rapid transit system as a stopgap measure. It's the same with the Bakerloo Line and express bus service to fill in the gaps before the funding becomes available for the extension. So those kind of things, taken in a whole, means that we are working very, very hard indeed to improve the accessibility, the affordability and the attractiveness of the network, whilst at the same time delivering extensions to the routes that we serve.
So not really done very much over the last couple of years then, so. Okay, thank you very much. That's quite a long list. Thank you very much. I'm going to pass back to the Chair.
Thanks, Assembly Member Cooper and Assembly Member Garrett. Would you like to come in?
Thank you. Yeah, it's a good guess that I might mention trams. So we've heard about how wonderful the trams are, but I'm sure you've also heard that just lately they haven't been quite so wonderful. And it's sort of an ironic problem in the sense that the improvement that they deliver, particularly I'm thinking of places like New Addington, which is largely cut off even from the rest of Croydon, let alone the rest of London, it sort of more than doubles the transport time. It's like 20-odd minutes from New Addington up to East Croydon, let's say, on the tram, and it's the thick end of an hour, really, if you try to make that journey by bus at peak times. And it's been pretty disastrous over the last well, for most of this calendar year, really. So I'll come on to exciting future things, but I suppose the fundamental thing is what is being done to make sure, firstly, that the tram network that we have now is actually going to work properly, because it's hard to blame people for getting in their car if the alternatives are a bit rubbish. And secondly, fundamental part of that is obviously replacing that tram rolling stock, which is now basically end of life. How soon can we get that done? It needs to be done, pronto, doesn't it? The original 24 trams.
Yes, it does, and I'd like to apologise for the disruption to the tram system that you and your constituents have faced in recent years. We had an issue. I'm sure you know the cause, but just for the benefit of everybody, there's been an issue discovered with the tram wheels because of obstructions in the track. And the maintenance of the trams was impacted by industrial action at a very unfortunate time. So we ended up with a situation where we were able to operate far fewer trams than were needed on the network, and there were a number of stop closures as well at the same time. So sincere apologies. The tram network is back up and running as it should, with a good service last time I checked. Again, happy to be corrected if that's changed in the last hour. And I want to pay tribute to the enormous work that TfL have done to get that tram system back up and running. You're absolutely right in stressing the importance of the tram network. New Addington is a very good example where there is very little alternative to the tram in order to connect, as you say, not just to the rest of the capital but to Croydon itself. And again, I'm grateful to TfL for working very hard indeed to identify the cause of the problem and indeed to then rectify it and make sure that the wheels were in proper condition. It does, of course, remain the fact that we do need new trams.
Sorry, just before you move on, can I just clarify? So you mentioned the industrial action. My understanding, which comes to me, so ITV came down and they spoke to the unions, they spoke to TfL, they spoke to me and lots of other passengers or would-be passengers. The information they got from the union was that there was not industrial action, either strikes, work to rule, nothing like that was connected to the wheel problem or the time that it took to get it back. When you mentioned industrial action,
it wasn't because of that. It happened at the same time, is what I'm saying. So there weren't sufficient maintenance staff available at the wrong time. So it's sort of an unhappy coincidence of the timing of the industrial action and the issue itself, not that the industrial action arose because of the issue, if that makes sense.
Sorry, but my understanding was there wasn't industrial action at that time. That the people doing the engineers, obviously we're talking about here, not the drivers, they were all at work as normal.
That's not my understanding. My understanding was that it happened at the same time. I'm happy to follow up with you.
That now. I just wanted to clarify. That was different from what I'd heard. But that'll be an issue to dig into later. Apologies, you were going on to talk about how you're going to buy us new trams.
Indeed. Which is very the renewal of the fleet is essential. As we know with trams. One size does not fit all, and each network is unique, and that means there are specific challenges when it comes to economies of scale. But of course the tram network in London, despite the fact if you look at the tube map, it might only appear to serve a small area, is in fact a major network. And so they work hard, and the trams need replacing. The caveat, as always, is ensuring that we have sufficient capital funding. There isn't a single transport authority in the world, even Hong Kong, as the only other one to operate with operating sustainability. There's not a single transport authority in the world that can operate independently, as we know, of government, either regional or national, when it comes to capital. And so the procurement of additional trams will depend on a long-term capital settlement. But it's very, very much part of our assumptions on future business planning, and it remains the case that we are committed, TfL is committed to ensuring the next generation of trams be procured as soon as possible.
But it's up to government, you're saying, to fund it?
It's always up to government to some extent how TfL's capital settlement is achieved. And of course we would call upon the support of all Assembly members with whatever government is elected in this forthcoming general election to secure that capital settlement.
Do you recognise a trade-off between fares and rolling stock investment. So, for example, on the budget committee, we spent a long time talking about how there's £123 million cost of this year's fares freeze and the impact that has medium to long term on TfL. I mean, that was a decision open to the Mayor, wasn't it, to spend that money on a fares freeze or to put it into capital investment?
Yes, there's always a trade-off, obviously, when you make a decision on anything, particularly as important as fares. And the trade-off in terms of where money can be spent and invested is obviously always balanced by how accessible and affordable the network is. We have to recognise that fares in London are a reflection of the fact that TfL, unlike transport authorities around the world, sorry, MTR in Hong Kong, you're getting a lot of mention here today, but they also receive much more government support than TfL does in terms of day-to-day operations as well. So it's important to recognise that trade-off means that if you increase fares beyond a certain amount during a cost of living crisis, of course, you end up in a situation where the network becomes inaccessible, unattractive, you work against your 80% target, and you end up in a situation where people drop off from using the network because they simply can't afford it. We don't want to see that happen, and that's why I personally believe that the fares freeze was essential.
Particularly when I speak to people, say, on the Central Line, you know, they've saved a small amount of money on their train fare, but then there's no train. We've seen that over the last year. Maybe there's no train, or because the trains are less frequent, the train is effectively inaccessible because it's so packed. I mean, that's the trade-off, isn't it?
Well,
how do you assess what's best for passengers between saving on the fare versus there not actually being a functional network for them to use?
Well, I would take issue with there not being a functional network. There were severe issues to do with the Central Line, as we know. There was a fault discovered on the fleet. This was during routine inspection, but as we know, there is a Central Line improvement programme that is ongoing. The Central Line improvement programme, the funding was committed pre-pandemic, thankfully, so that funding is available. That is refitting existing trains and carriages, making sure that they have new features and new motors, in fact, which will mean that they're much more reliable. It will mean that the issues that we've seen on the existing fleet won't happen. And that will obviously, and is delivering significant improvement to users of the Central Line. Of course, there was disruption, and I'm sorry to customers that there was disruption. The Central Line Improvement Programme was itself delayed because of the pandemic. It was also delayed because it was not possible to get the staff in place because of the pandemic to ensure that we could deliver it to the original timetable. But the delay has meant that the existing rolling stock was working harder than we had previously planned before the pandemic, and the result is that these issues have appeared sooner than we would like. But that issue and the timetabling that TfL has brought in, so that there is now a routine and a reliable service on the Central Line, slightly fewer trains than the full service that we had before the issue was identified, but their quick planning means that there is a good service on most days on the Central Line now, which was not the case a few weeks ago.
Okay, pausing discussion on things on rails and moving to things on roads. So I've lived in the area that I represent for quite a number of years now, and despite your impressive sounding list, it's very hard to think of substantial improvements in public transport that have happened. So one of them, for example, there's now a service that I use to get into London Bridge, but that's obviously not a TfL service. There's some improvement to the Superloop, but substantially the public transport network that exists across Croydon and Sutton, similarly to other parts of outer London, is basically the same as it was, say, 20 years ago. So if 20 years from now, the plan is that a substantial proportion of people are not using their car, they're using a public transport network, how do you make it so much better that it's good enough for people to not need to use their cars? Because that's the pitch that you were making earlier, and I don't want to rehash all of that. But I don't see any plans coming down the pipeline that are going to substantially change what's on offer. And so how is it that people will be able to get around without needing to use their cars the way they do now?
You live in Croydon and I don't, but I would take issue with the idea that the network 20 years ago is the same as it is today. I think, but we're happy to disagree. In terms of the options that people have, and the Superloop, by the way, has proven the need for town centre to town centre connections. And I think, and it will, because we've got the Superloop 2 already, it will be a catalyst for further links between town centres and outer London and express bus routes and bus routes that feed into it. But one of the proposals that we have, and that was in the Mayor's manifesto, was, of course, for TfL to take over many of the suburban lines that run through South London, in particular. And you mentioned the service from TOCs, train operating companies that are not TfL. As we know, revenue on TOCs is controlled by central government, and during the pandemic, an overtly rational decision was taken to reduce the service levels on some of those lines to save money. The end result, however, has been that the reduced frequencies on some of those lines means that people have stopped using them or stopped relying on them as much as they used to. And I'm pleased that TfL did not take the decision to reduce its service levels on things like the Overground, where the service frequency was maintained in spite, obviously, of the lower ridership during the pandemic. When the demand returned, the confidence was still there in there being a frequent service on those lines, and so people are using them. That's not been the case on some other TOC lines into London. So control of those lines, integrating more elements of the public transport system into TfL, I think will be a hugely important part of increasing confidence, recognition and trust in the public transport system. So I think in further 20 years, I would expect that people will consider themselves far more integrated into the TfL network than perhaps they might now, and certainly than they did 20 years ago.
I don't want to be impolite, but what I don't see in your answer and what I don't see around me is a substantial difference in the set of options available to make journeys. I see this a lot. So my children are now at the age where they often go off independently by themselves. They love to, fire up their app, use their Zip Oyster card, and off they go. But they surprisingly often, call on dad's taxi, or mum's taxi for that matter, because frankly, it's like a third to a half the journey time. I can pick her up, drop her off at her friend's, come back before she would even have got there if she'd gone on the bus, let's say. And that's quite the norm, So I don't see anything that you mentioned or that I see coming down the road, apologies, terrible pun, you did warn us earlier, that's really going to change that, in terms of, it is really typical, because I check it myself, I use the Citymapper app, I use Waze when I'm in my car. It's usually like a third to a half the time to make the journey by car. I don't see anything that's happening that will change that. And so I don't see anything that's going to make people think that here's a better alternative. Do you see what I mean? You're talking about a huge step change.
Understand.
A huge step change.
Yeah,
and I don't see the network change that would enable that to happen. It just feels like you're just going to browbeat people into going, oh, it's awful that you use your car. And they'll go, maybe it is, but we're going to do it because it's half the time.
Sure. I'm not in the business of browbeating anyone, I can assure you. I understand where you're coming from, and I completely understand the way in which you rationalise a decision on how to travel. Of course, you're going to look at what is quickest, what is cheapest, what is more direct, and what is more instinctive. It could depend on all sorts of things like the weather, for example, the time of day, how safe you feel. All of these factors are decisions that each and every one of us has to weigh up with every journey that we make. Of course it is. I would challenge you, however, that I accept that some of the journeys you've posited there, you might be quicker by car. I wonder what they are on those other set of criteria. It would be interesting to kind of consider more than just the journey time. I would also challenge you that some of the journeys that perhaps you're not making but might be quicker by bus. They might not. But I think there's a whole range of different ways in which we can determine how intuitive or not the public transport network is. The key thing, as I said earlier, is that we recognise that in central and inner London there are more options. It's easier to travel by public transport in most parts of central and inner London than it is in large parts of outer London, and that's what we are committed to change. So you ask about what will change in 20 years' time. I want to see a bus network, a tram network, a tube network, a rail network, a walking network, a wheeling network, and a cycling network with cycle hires and other providers as well, that is as intuitive, as easy to use as it is in central and inner London.
Okay, final quick short question from me. So there are 14, so you're talking about your importance of outer London. There are 14 JLA constituencies, so therefore presumably a 14th of your time roughly would be spent thinking about each of them. Perhaps a bit more than that for mine, since you're so stress the importance of outer London. So will you commit over this term that you'll spend, 1/14 of your time, I guess, is 1 or 2 days a month to actually, come to Croydon and Sutton, Bromley and Bexley, those other outer London areas that aren't well served, so that you can see what I see, which is that it is much quicker to travel by car and that the alternatives often aren't as good. And then you have a practical sense in your own mind of what are the kinds of journeys and how difficult they are.
That's a very easy question to answer, absolutely. And in fact, it's one of the things that I've asked, as Deputy Mayor, asked my team to initiate, which is exactly that. And I'm also very happy to try a few journeys out with you. we can test the network ourselves. Very, very happy to do that.
Great. Sorry, is that something you're already doing, or you're going to do?
I've got a plan in place, but I'll obviously work with you to ensure that we see what we need to see in Croydon and the other areas you serve. Absolutely.
I'll send you some sample journeys. Great. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Assembly Member Garrett. And just to remind, other outer London boroughs are available, and I'm sure the invitation will be also offered from colleagues who have other outer London boroughs. And then I hand over to Assembly Member Russell.
Thank you, Chair. So I want to circle back to the 80% target that Assemblymember Cooper raised just earlier, and that target in the MTS as it was published in 2018-19 was set for 2041. However, the Mayor has accepted and published advice on the 2030 net zero, the Element Energy report, which actually talks about bringing forward MTS outcomes by 10 years, which makes it look like that 80% ought to be being met by 2030. So my question is, have you and TfL already assessed your targets and progress on targets? And what updates do you plan to publish in the coming term?
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. I mean, on all of these metrics, we continually review where we are against the targets. Also, by the way, this is something that the board does as a matter of routine, and board members who bring a range of expertise from the backgrounds that they have routinely question in a public setting TfL officers when it comes to delivering on those targets. We have a series of very ambitious sub-targets. We all know about net zero and 2030. The reason for those ambitious targets is obvious. We want to move as quickly and as effectively as possible to deliver on those. The ambition to have a fully electric bus fleet by 2030, for example, will at a stroke halve TfL's carbon emissions. So there are things that, whilst not easy and require, as again, funding from government, they are nonetheless, in terms of the number of things we need to do, relatively straightforward. I am very happy to look again at the 2041 80% target. As I said, it's the 80% that is instilled in my mind. The 2041, if we can move that forward and work with you to identify ways to do that, I would be very, very happy to revisit that with the board as well.
Okay, so the advice in the Element Energy report, which the Mayor had accepted, has not actually filtered across into the MTS targets yet. So is that something? Is that a commitment that you've just given, that you will be looking at those MTS targets in relation to the 2030 targets in this term? I mean, because this term gets you to within 2 years of 2030. So if you're not on track with those targets, with just 2 years after that, it'll be very difficult to make up the time.
Yeah, I completely agree. We the action that we need to take in this term is enormous, and we need to move very, very quickly. As I say, the bus target alone is hugely ambitious. It requires not just a procurement strategy, but also working with government as well to deliver the necessary infrastructure upgrades on the power network, for example, working with boroughs to ensure that the planning process doesn't mean that we have too many competing demands on that power network, which can easily be overloaded if we simply put in a charging stations for buses. So there's a huge amount of work to do on that. And yes, the Element Energy report was incredibly helpful in identifying where we can go faster. Again, all of those are issues that we discuss weekly with the Commissioner, with the relevant officers when it comes to net zero and safety and other elements of the MTS targets. And I'm very, very happy to look at ways of accelerating our targets. Of course, if we end up ahead of trajectory, I would be very, very pleased indeed.
So, do you have a plan to get Londoners on board with this? Because I think at the moment these targets are sort of probably not particularly apparent to many Londoners who are basically just using the transport network to try and get from A to B. Do you have plans to try and get everyone on a bit of a mission to increase those journeys to the 80%?
The short answer is yes, and we want people to love the transport system. It sounds a bit kind of flippant perhaps, but it is important that people identify, for example, with the Roundel with a sense of pride, and I think on balance many people do, but we want people to understand it's not just a transport system. It's about so many aspects of life in the city. As I said, it's about the environment, it's about housing, it's about being a catalyst for growth and so on. And actually I'd love to work with the Assembly to make that case, to get people to identify with public transport as more than just a means to an end, but as a way of really celebrating the fact that it is possible in many cases to travel huge distances around this city on public and active transport, something that frankly is not available in most other parts, not just of the country but of the world.
Mm-hmm. And just going back to the Outer London piece that Assembly Member Garrett has been raising, and you're talking about working with the boroughs, are you also talking about working with boroughs outside London, so that because obviously many of the journeys in Outer London will be partly by people who live in the area surrounding London, so do you have active communication with those boroughs so you can plan the bus journeys that are going to most help A, the people living in the outer boroughs, and B, the people who are living in that area around the outside of London?
It's a really good point, because we are restricted obviously in what we can directly do in terms of service provision. Obviously the Greater London boundary is what it is, and the zone, if you like, of TfL's responsibility is what it is, but that doesn't mean that we aren't and shouldn't work with neighbouring local authorities to deliver some of those links. It might be that we're restricted in what we can directly provide, but certainly we do have ad hoc at the moment conversations with other local authorities on routes that extend across the boundary, or routes that perhaps pick up where TfL services end, if you like. But I'll be honest, it would be wonderful to have a bit more coordination on that, and working with DfT perhaps and others in central government to identify areas that we could link up more effectively, I think would be really important. We've talked about town centre to town centre connections within Greater London. There are a lot of town centres, as we know, just outside the Greater London boundary, thinking in particular around the southwest of the city, where it would be a really good idea to work more effectively with local authorities to provide some of those cross-boundary links. Very, very keen to advance that.
Mm-hmm. That's good to hear. Just finally, just to absolutely pin down, so the Mayor's transport strategy, the Mayor at MQT last week kind of suggested that he just wants to get on and deliver work without any delay, and seemed to be implying that he wasn't actually going to update the strategies. So how will the TfL board and how will Londoners and the London Assembly know what targets and what interim targets you are working to, so that we can support you on the mission that you're trying to drive forward?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, the MTS is a very good strategy, and just because it was written in 2018 doesn't mean that it's in any way defunct or not a good strategy now. It's working in so many areas. It's delivering a trajectory towards targets that are really important and deliver on so many other aspects of what's necessary in the city. But I hear what you're saying, and in terms of is there enough, I mean, obviously there are interim targets that are published, but perhaps there are many that aren't. So I'd be very, very happy to work with you to identify the ones that aren't, what we can do to publicise them more, and how we can work together to ensure that we are meeting them and that people have confidence that we're meeting them, and where we're not, what we can do to accelerate work towards meeting them. So yes, very happy to work with you to do that.
Great, thank you very much indeed. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Assembly Member Russell. And now back to Assembly Member Garrett.
Hello. Question about the board. So important part of the role involves supporting the chair and leading the TfL board. So what have you done in carrying out that role, and what more do you intend to do?
Yes, thank you. The board is an incredibly helpful, diverse, and as I said earlier, sometimes overlooked part of TfL's, not overlooked by TfL, I should add, but just in sort of general awareness. And supporting the chair in the delivery of not just the board meetings, which obviously are regular and well publicised, but in the committees and the panels as well, has been a hugely rewarding part of the role that I've performed. The chair cannot do everything that the board requires of the chair, and so I, as deputy, am often required to step up. In terms of recruitment, for example, the current commissioner was recruited under a process chaired by me. The new board members, subject again to your approval for my nomination as deputy chair, would be nominated under a process again chaired by me, and in that process I'm very cognizant of the fact that the board needs to reflect London, it needs to represent London, and in addition to the Assembly, the board is also a body by which TfL can be held accountable and adhere obviously to the best governance principles. So I take my role as deputy chair very, very seriously indeed, and the board members, as I say, who have supported me in the work that I do, I'm extremely grateful to them, and frankly they're a wonderful bunch of people, and I very much hope to appoint another wonderful bunch of people.
Excellent. So connecting this to some of the other issues that have come up around Vision Zero, bus safety, probably will not surprise you that I'm going to ask you a thing that I've asked the Mayor and the TfL Commissioner, and I believe TfL Head of Safety multiple times in the past, which is that although the Commissioner's report to the board does start with a section on safety, it doesn't include a sort of tracking data of, and I'm thinking particularly about the bus fleet, because obviously that's the fleet of vehicles on London roads that the TfL most directly control. It doesn't say to the board, this is how many people have been killed or injured by London's buses in the last period, and I found an example of TfL Commissioner report, actually there had been a fatality due to a bus during the period covered by the report, which wasn't mentioned. So it's a question I've repeatedly asked that I'm probably going to keep on asking. Do you not think it would be an important, if safety is the most important metric for TfL, that the TfL board is presented with that data at each meeting and encouraged to ask, what have we done in the last period to improve this, and what are we doing in the next period to improve it, to bring those numbers down of 50 odd people hospitalised by our bus fleet roughly every month?
So the data, as I understand it, the data is presented to the relevant panel of the board, and of course the panel scrutinises the work of the Commissioner and Director of Buses and other aspects of the network to ensure that the questions that they have arising from the expertise in this area that they have are met, and that they're satisfied that TfL is doing what it needs to do. Again, obviously, when the conversations that I have on a weekly basis and more with the Commissioner and Director of Buses and Safety, we have a similar if not identical process in terms of identifying what it is that we can do on infrastructure, on design, working with the bus drivers, etc., etc. There are many different aspects, and of course each incident is unique in the sense that there are a unique series of circumstances, whether they be outside our control or within our control. And where they're within our control, we always analyse what they could be. In terms of presenting to the board, I can certainly I don't know what the kind of rationale would be for not having a totality of statistics presented at the board, but I can certainly ask that be presented to the board. I see no reason why not.
Yeah, I mean, not to drag this out, but obviously I think my understanding is you're correct that it is presented to the safety panel. But when I hear that safety is our number one priority, I think, what would I do if it were my number one priority? I would probably not present it to a panel. I'd probably present it to the board, put it in front of the board, encourage the board to quiz it. If that's our number one priority, that's what it being a priority means.
Yeah, no,
that data doesn't seem to be there.
I think it's fair, but we do have to recognise that scrutiny is happening, and it's happening at the panel. Your request that it happen at the board, I completely understand, and obviously it's up to board members as to what they raise, and I can assure you that the board is not pre-prepared in any board meeting, or I have no idea, and the Commissioner has no idea, and the Chair has no idea what questions they'll be raising at any given point. But yes, the board meeting is as apt an opportunity to question the Commissioner and to query the statistics as any other forum. But just to reassure everybody, it is analysed and it is discussed in detail at the safety panel.
Okay, and just one quick final thing on it's not really, I suppose it's partly related to the board. Since it is the top priority, which I suppose the board should be looking at. You said there's no pattern, but there are some patterns, and obviously one of them is this business about unintended accelerations, which seems to be a common pattern in buses. And there was a report in 2022 into that unintended accelerations. Do you know where TfL is in terms of agreeing and implementing the recommendations from? I think is it ECOM? I'm not sure how you say it. AECOM, I think, with a consultant who produced that.
Yes, so you're right. There's a number of different aspects of bus design that TfL is working with manufacturers on. We've got advanced emergency braking is now required, interior safety features and vulnerable road user alerting systems being some of the new components of that we require on the operators to put in their buses. And as I said earlier, it's important that we work with the unions and the drivers themselves because obviously with different instances, different understandings of what has occurred can often be the case, and it's important that we understand all of the circumstances where possible. There is, for example, technology that we're working with to look at the footwell and to monitor the footwell so that it becomes clearer if a pedal has been applied by accident, for example. Is that a prevalent issue? It's actually not very clear yet, but as I say, we are the only city doing this. There are many instances around the world of presumed accidental acceleration, particularly on electric buses, and that has the work to look at the cause of that, to my knowledge, is not being undertaken by any other city. So again, I would rather have the acknowledgement of the problem and the discussion of the problem, even if it seems as it's just a London problem. We know it's happening elsewhere, but I'd rather we were the ones who are openly discussing it.
Let me just say, I am concerned that the perception of drivers is sometimes they get individually held responsible for what is really a systemic issue. I don't want to this is not the place to get into that, but I just want to put that on the record. I do have a concern that you get systemic pressures, timetable pressure, for example, on a driver, and then you talk about each incident being unique, but if there's lots of timetable pressure, it's it's an unreasonable pressure on that driver, and I do hear that from drivers. But my specific question before was about the recommendations from that 2022 report. Are they all accepted, and are they all done or being worked on?
In terms of the exact number of which have been accepted, and I'll have to get back to you. I don't have that full list, but I'm very happy to get back to you on that.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Assemblymember Garrett. And now we're going to go to Assemblymember Wilson, virtually. Hello.
Hello, thank you, Chair. And hello, Seb. Good to meet you. Apologies, I'm not there in person. At this point, I think I should probably say it probably doesn't surprise anyone given my background that see, I don't personally share the urgency with the 80% target, and in contrast with some of my colleagues, I certainly wouldn't support bringing it forward. But I guess I'm in a minority there. I think that I would prefer we view transport methods not only in terms of pure necessity, but also as a question of personal choice. And I don't think people should be vilified for using their cars. It's a perfectly valid and legitimate choice and should be recognised as such. But that's not really a question. It's more of a kind of personal observation, and I recognise that I'm probably in a minority there. So moving on to my question now, the disadvantage, I guess, of being further down the question list is that you have already covered some of this to an extent. So, but perhaps an opportunity to delve into it a little bit more. But so what would you consider as sort of two or three of the top three challenges for the role of Deputy Chair moving forwards over the coming term? I know you've mentioned in particular the talk of the need for whatever the government is in a few weeks' time, a long-term infrastructure funding settlement. But alongside that, perhaps another two or three top challenges for your role and how your experience will help deliver those.
Yes, thank you for your question. And I should point out, I don't think anybody here is suggesting that that it not be personal choice about how we travel. The challenge, really, and the 80%, whether or not you agree with it, we obviously have it. The 80% target, the work that we do is designed to make the public and active transport network the intuitive choice. That's what we want. We want people to choose it. Certainly not. There's no suggestion of it being not a choice. You asked me what the challenges, other than the funding challenge, is. Obviously, the funding kind of underpins the ability to deliver on so much. But you asked for three things: and it's affordability, it's accessibility, and it's sustainability. Those are the three pillars of a transport system that is intuitive. If it's affordable, people will choose it over private car journeys because it is something that is more intuitive and doesn't impact so much in a cost of living crisis. Very aware of the impact that the cost of living crisis has had on so many Londoners. We don't want transport to be a disproportionate burden. It's not easy because of, as I say, the lack of proportional government support compared to other transport authorities, but we have managed to keep fares frozen, and I think that is an important part of ensuring the network is attractive. The sustainability of it is clear. We cannot contribute to the climate emergency unduly. We have to do everything we can to reduce our carbon emissions. It's very difficult to imagine a future. We talked about 20 years' time. If we don't reduce and eliminate our carbon emissions, then in 20 years' time, I hope we're still talking about the public transport system, but there's a very real possibility that we're talking about many much more existential issues, and the public transport system is essential in solving this emergency. We cannot meet our targets unless we move towards our 80% goal. And the accessibility point is so crucial. As I said, the public transport system, sorry, I don't know where to look, but I can see on the screen, sorry. The public transport system is public, and I feel it very strongly when I travel on the network and I'm kind enough to be shown the barriers that people face by the people who face them, and things that I perhaps would have dismissed or not recognised, I now see on a daily basis, and I get irritated by them, and I report them back as and when I can, and I hope that leads to small incremental improvements. But clearly we need a systemic approach, and that's why it's so important that the physical barriers, the neurodivergent barriers, the cost barriers that people face are eliminated as much as we can, and those are the three challenges that I would say underpin everything we do.
Thank you. I think that last point is particularly important, and accessibility. And if you do want people to make better use of these things, it needs to be comfortable, safe, secure, accessible. So no, I welcome that. Thank you. A kind of related question. So we talked about challenges, perhaps so related, but perhaps slightly more positive looking forward. What do you think would be the biggest opportunity for Deputy Chair in the role in the coming term ahead?
Thank you. I like optimistic questions. It's good to be optimistic. I think, look, I mentioned the expertise that exists in the sector, and I'm constantly amazed and impressed by the young people, the apprentices who are starting out on their journey at TfL, the huge pride they have, but also the excitement they have at being able to work for an organisation that is so instrumental in expanding people's access to the city, people's understanding and enjoyment of the city, but as I said, whether they live here or whether they visit. And so I'm very excited about the new opportunities that exist, the new technology that we can make use of, the innovation in ticketing and accessibility and wayfinding as well. I think there are hugely exciting innovations that we can see beginning to appear, particularly, and we mentioned the climate crisis, but some of the innovations in adapting the stations, adapting the network to a different climate and helping to reduce our carbon emissions, some of the innovations on power supply and how we improve the efficiency of the rolling stock and so on. There's so much excitement and energy out there, and unlike perhaps many parts of our day-to-day existence, I genuinely feel that the transport system and TfL and the people who work for it, either directly or in the supply chain, are really energetic and really have the future in their sights. So I am optimistic that we can solve a lot of the challenges we face because we've got the brightest and the best who are interested in doing it.
Back to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Assembly Member Wilson. And now Assembly Member Russell.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just looking at working with partners, sort of building and maintaining an effective transport system involves convening partners, organisations and stakeholders from across London, many of whom have diverging agendas. So how successful have you been in influencing partners to work with you to help deliver on the Mayor's transport commitments?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's easy to think that City Hall, TfL, the Mayor can do everything and is responsible for everything, when of course we know that the nature of government in the city is complex, and that when delivering on citywide priorities we have to work with a number of stakeholders, and rightly so obviously, but it would be impossible to implement the MTS without working with the boroughs, for example, without working with other layers of government and representatives in order to do that. There are hundreds of issues that I could drill into where that stakeholder relationship is important. There are very high-profile disagreements on, for example, the cycle infrastructure and what needs to be done to maintain segregated cycleways, and it's not easy because people have very strongly and well-informed views on what it is needs to be put in place or indeed taken away. And one of the key things that I've had to do is manage those different views to ensure that we listen to as many people as possible to take on board all of the points where possible. And obviously it would be wonderful if everybody agreed on the solutions and was confident that we had the right idea and design in our cycle network, for example. But clearly there are different views on what that design should look like. And so the process of informing and bringing people with us, and of course we can't ever solve every disagreement, but I hope that the genesis and the purpose behind the decisions that are reached are properly communicated and explained. And that process involves listening, it involves convening meetings, it involves working with others, such as the Walking and Cycling Commissioner, who does a fantastic job, by the way, in coordinating stakeholders on many of these issues. I've chosen the cycle network because it's an obvious example on bus stop bypasses where there is a disagreement, but there are hundreds and hundreds of other areas where that involvement with stakeholders is really, really crucial. And I hope by and large, we get the result that satisfies the greatest number of people, whilst recognising that not everyone will be satisfied all the time.
I think the thing that certainly going through the recent election campaign that came through loud and clear from a lot of the campaigners was the importance of co-production and kind of genuine involvement and listening. So it's good to hear you talking about the work the Walking and Cycling Commissioner is doing around listening and convening groups. I was thinking slightly more about the way the TfL and the Mayor's environment team collaborated very closely to deliver ULEZ. And I wonder whether there's going to be any similar kinds of collaboration between TfL and other parts of the GLA in terms of delivery of the 2030 net zero goals. Is that something that are the lessons from the ULEZ collaborations that might transfer across?
Oh, absolutely, 100%. Thank you for, by the way, identifying the close cooperation between the environment teams and the transport teams on ULEZ. It was a very close relationship, is a very close relationship, and the nature of that unsiloed working, because we hear so much about siloed working, I don't know what the opposite is, but let's call it unsiloed, was essential and refreshing, actually, to be honest, coming from other universes where siloed thinking is very much prevalent. So yes, is the short answer. TfL will be instrumental in delivering the net zero targets. It cannot be done without increasing ridership and usage of the network. There's a whole range of, it's not just about the 80% target, obviously it's about the things we can do on power purchase agreements, for example, on sustainable drainage, on a whole range of issues that affect both the physical environment but also the way in which we run and power the network. Of course, we have to do all we can to contribute to the target and work with others. I've mentioned housing already. Housing is a hugely important part of driving our net zero targets by having good quality, sustainable homes, insulated homes where obviously energy consumption is much less than it otherwise would be. Transport is key to all of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm very glad to hear you talk about power purchase agreements, because I think it was back before you were Deputy Mayor, I found out that TfL was only using 0.01% renewable energy, and that's one of the reasons I'm glad I'm back on Transport Committee, so I can continue to chase that down a few years later to see how you're doing on that. But thank you very much. Back to you, Chair.
Thanks, Assemblymember Russell. Nice to give nice that she gave you a warning of something that's coming up. And over to Assemblymember Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. I just wondered if we could talk a bit about the relationship with that national body that I think is still exists until the end of this week, and then everyone will run away from Parliament and do other things, although some of them appear to be doing that at the moment already. I mean, obviously, the previous mayor before the current one came to an agreement with a previous Prime Minister. I can't remember quite how many Prime Ministers back it was, but David Cameron, that's about 6 Prime Ministers ago or something, and agreed that TfL would no longer get an operating grant from April 2018, which obviously a date after that person was no longer actually going to be the Mayor of London. And that operating grant used to be 700 million a year, is my understanding, so we haven't had that money from government. Can you just confirm, are we the only transport operator in the whole of the country that gets nothing from the Department for Transport in terms of an operating grant? Is that correct?
I think so, but okay. I will have to check, but I think you're right. I'm not aware of any other transport authority that operates independent of an operating grant.
And obviously Londoners who do have cars, and I'm very happy to note in the context of our discussion talking about moving towards 80% of journeys on public transport and active travel, that probably only about 50% of Londoners now have cars. But of that 50% of Londoners who do have cars, vehicle excise duty obviously is still something that's paid, and about £500 million a year goes into the Department of Transport, and that's where they get the money from that creates the operating grant. So since April 2018, if my maths is correct, that would be about £3 billion that has been paid in by Londoners, and we've had nothing back at all from central government since then, and certainly not in the last couple of years when you've been the Deputy Mayor for Transport. So far from being a begging bowl of going to government, actually we're just talking about getting some money back from government towards the many things, whether it's capital or improvements in rolling stock or signalling or, you know, all of those projects, from that money that Londoners are actually paying in.
I think you've alighted on a very, very important topic and conversation that needs to take place with central government. Clearly, the operating grants that were provided by government are very much welcomed, and I want to pay tribute to outgoing ministers with whom we've had a very constructive relationship, but it hasn't always been the case. When I started, the relationship wasn't very constructive. I'm happy to say that in recent months it's been very constructive, and I personally have been extremely grateful for their support in the work that they've done. But the issue remains that fundamentally there is a problem if you have a system that relies on 6 monthly deals to procure new rolling stock, to order new trains, etc. It costs more as well. Obviously, if you have a 5-year funding horizon, you're able to plan, you're able to prepare the supply chain much more effectively, and you cannot say it enough that TfL supports an entire supply chain that spreads across the entire UK. So the buses that are procured, the vast majority of the buses are assembled in the UK, in Ballymena, in Falkirk, in Scarborough. The trains are built in Derby, in Goole. These are orders that... And
I think the taxis come from just outside Coventry.
And the taxis come from just outside Coventry, indeed. And TfL would want to put more orders in. I mean, look at, for example, we talked about the Central Line Improvement Programme. As crucial as it is, in 10 years' time, we would want new trains on the network. The Bakerloo line is operating the oldest trains, I think, in Western Europe in service. They're wonderful engineering marvels, and every time one pulls into the station, I'm in awe of its engineering greatness. But the reality is they need replacing, and that requires a long-term funding deal. And my plea really is the incoming government. And by the way, this is a plea that is shared by all mayors and deputy mayors around the country. We need 5-year funding deals to enable us to plan and to get economies of scale.
I think it's also funding deals that aren't sort of announced 5 minutes before the last one is elapsing. I once heard one of the Conservative London MPs saying, I don't know what they're making a fuss about. We have to manage with the funding deal that comes in every year. But these are usually, even for local authorities, the funding settlements are announced in December for the forthcoming year, starting from the 1st of April. And that's several months in advance, whereas, of course, this was all lastminute.com to the nth degree, wasn't it?
Yes, it was, and it wasn't the most pleasant experience either, existing with such short timescales. I also point out that it affects the markets and it impacts credit ratings as well. I'm pleased to say that TfL's credit rating has increased significantly in the past few months, but I would not want the pressure to be put on TfL from last-minute decisions from central government or indeed anywhere else. It's not helpful.
Do you think the success of opening the Elizabeth line and also things like the extension of the Northern Line to Battersea Power Station has helped improve the relationships with government, or would you put it down to something else?
I think... Well, first of all, I try and take a...
Or change of personnel, it's something like that.
Well, yeah, there was a change of personnel, and that definitely did help. I like to think that I'm collegiate. I take the role very seriously indeed. Yes, I was an elected person in the previous life, but my role as Deputy Mayor and Deputy Chair is to not be political and to work with everyone. And I have enjoyed, as I say, in the last few months, working with the DfT. I've found the Minister in particular to be incredibly constructive and very helpful. That has not always been the case. We shouldn't depend really on personalities and relationships like that, but building trust is important, and I've tried to build trust throughout, and pleased to say that that trust was finally established with the most recent Rail Minister, and I look forward to his successor and a equally, if not better, relationship with them.
So what are you doing to prepare for the change in government? I mean, obviously it could be the current government coming back again, but obviously it will be changed. I mean, there's various announcements have already been made, so it will be with a refreshed mandate or a new government completely coming in. What are you doing to prepare for that?
Yeah, so very much getting the priorities in terms of requests and also what we can offer in line. So I've talked obviously...
Well, that was going to be my next question, is what are your top asks? No, what's at the top of your list? And no more than 47, please.
I mean, we need to stress the case that investment in the public transport system generates growth. We are obviously in a situation where public finances are not in the best place. I think it's fair to acknowledge that. And we are going to have to work with whoever is elected in a circumstance where there is not going to be a surfeit of public funds. And that means that the money has to be invested properly, and it has to be invested in a way that generates a greater return. And I think we can demonstrate that, and the credit rating, by the way, helps. It shows that TfL, and as does the operating surplus, it shows that TfL is a good investment, that a pound invested in TfL equals more out in terms of economic value. We know, for example, with the Elizabeth line, that the cost of building it, whilst substantial, I'm not pretending it isn't substantial, the economic benefit outweighs the cost, and there will come a point where it pays for itself. We're not at that point yet, but there will come a point when it pays for itself. And clearly the additional economic value that the Elizabeth line has brought, not just with the additional connectivity, but also the displacement of journeys that would otherwise have taken place through different methods, means that we are able to demonstrate a very real return on investment in TfL. I think a key challenge is going to be ensuring that we don't have a kind of face-off between London and the rest of the country. It's not the case that there is one single pot of money that if you put it in the rest of the country, London will be all right because London's already had investment. As we know, you need to continually invest in a system in order to maintain its upgrade, to maintain its reliability and attractiveness. If you cut investment in London, you then cut investment in the rest of the country, because London is a net provider to the Exchequer. Growth in London is really important. So I'm heartened to hear comments from many quarters that are supportive of the need for investment in London as a way of investing in the rest of the country, and that's what we would stress going forward, and it's something that TfL is very keen to stress as well.
Okay, so if I sort of recap, you were talking about investment generates growth, so that might be some of the improvements that we touched on. In fact, when I was asking you some questions earlier, we were also saying don't cut the overall investment. Investment in things like rolling stock and signalling to make sure that the transport system maintains, it being an offer that people would want to, who wants to, I mean, to a certain extent, you get onto the Bakerloo train, marvel of engineering as it is, but you think actually this is a bit tatty, and that's really an understatement. So those improvements, I think I just want to ask you one thing. Would you agree with me that getting Crossrail 2 done should be a slogan that we should develop?
I'm not a comms expert, but I'm very happy to work on a slogan. What I would return to my earlier point, though, that obviously Crossrail 2 is at the biggest end of the scale of upfront cost, of course, and I think we also need to be very honest that Crossrail 2 is not going to happen in the next 5 years in terms of the building of it. unless something changes, of course. Never say never. But the safeguarding of the route is so important, because there are so many different aspects of growth that Crossrail 2 can provide. And obviously, who knows where we'll be with the new government. It's possible that this will be an infrastructure priority, but I think we need to be realistic that it probably won't be at this stage. But safeguarding that route, making it clear to future generations that we have thought about what they will need in the future, what they will need to develop and enhance the targets that we've already set. I think that's really important. Don't close these options off now simply because at the moment the funding isn't available. And think also of ways of bridging the gap, and that's what the bus rapid transit in the DLR extension and the Bakerloo line rapid bus, the Baker Loop, is also about.
And also looking into the need to work with government on innovative funding arrangements, because Crossrail 1, I can't remember, who was that Transport Minister who had something to do with chauffeuring it through the House of Commons? Whatever happened to him, I wonder. But I mean, you know, we talk about needing the investment and it would be one of the biggest, but we did come up with quite an innovative way of sorting out the funding for Crossrail 1, also known as the Elizabeth Line. Crossrail 2 would be so transformative for all of those stations and areas up in the north, and obviously I'm very interested because it comes down to the southwest, passes through both of the boroughs in my constituency. But do we need to start thinking about that soon with a new government?
Yeah, I think I think we should have a frank discussion about how we fund the network going forward. It's obviously going to be a discussion with different government departments, perhaps with different views, but I think it's also a discussion that we need to have with our colleagues elsewhere in the country as well, and we need to look internationally at what works and what doesn't work abroad as well. So yeah, I'm, you know, one of the things that I notice whenever I have discussions with colleagues in other parts of the country and indeed in other parts of the world is that the challenges we face are pretty much identical.
They're pretty similar.
Exactly. I mean, we have obvious different degrees by which people benefit from the networks, and we're very lucky in London. We have one of the most extensive, comprehensive range of transport options of any city in the world, and we should remember that. We should be proud of it. But you know, we have things we need to do. As I mentioned, the challenge in Outer London, we've mentioned the journey times and other factors that people decide. But working with our colleagues to determine what works and what doesn't. And you know, I'm proud that they've taken a lot of what we've done. Look at the B network, for example, in Manchester, is modelled very much on the London bus network. And there's so much we can do together. I think working with central government, whatever hue that is, I think we should have that discussion, most definitely.
And learning some lessons from abroad as well, which I think you threw in there as well. Thanks very much, Chair. That's me done.
And thank you, Assemblymember Cooper. And just looking to the committee, those are all the questions we... Oh, yes.
Just picking up on the discussion you were having with Assemblymember Cooper, you talked about how investment in, say, new buses, new rolling stock in London generates a sort of, do we still use the word levelling up? Maybe not. Effect across the UK. I've seen press reports that TfL is now ordering a load of buses from China. So where does that leave us? What's the plan there?
Yeah, we've got to remember that 1,400 buses are zero emission. It's the largest zero emission bus fleet in Western Europe. We want to get all our buses zero emission by 2030. Currently on track for 2034. Now you might think, well, it's only 4 years difference, but as I said, it halves TfL's carbon emissions at a stroke if we get to this target. We have the largest bus fleet in the world outside Shanghai, some 9,000 buses, and this was an order for 100 buses. The vast majority of the buses on our roads are assembled in the UK. One thing I think we should be doing, again, this is working with central government, is to identify the economies of scale, and we can and should work with our colleagues in other parts of the country as well who also want to transition to zero emission buses. I want Britain to have the industrial capacity, the Mayor wants Britain to have the industrial capacity to be able to produce the range of buses that we need to meet that target. The order in question was done by a bus operator. My understanding is that TfL has very limited ability to challenge that order on the limited number of grounds that they can challenge that order, and the grounds, as I understand it, have been met. But the commercial decisions aside, I want more industrial capacity in the UK. I want as many of these buses to be assembled in the UK as possible. I'm very proud of the fact that we have a vast supply chain across the UK, and that some of the best buses that we have on the network, the 63, big shout out, are assembled in the UK, and they prove that we can do it. So I hope that we can work with central government to make it more intuitive for operators to procure from UK companies.
That's quite a lengthy answer there, but the bottom line is the argument for investing in London is investing in the rest of the UK. TfL can't control that, and it might become the new normal that operators order their buses from China or somewhere else overseas.
It might be, but I want to make sure that we work to ensure it isn't.
Okay, thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Assemblymember Garrett. And those are now all the questions that we have for you today. So can I thank Seb Dance for attending today's meeting. You can now leave, but you may sit and observe the committee's discussion from the public gallery if you wish. Just give you a bit of a chance. You can take the water if you want. Those that's no, it's owned by Londoners. I'm sure you could have the glass if you want. Thank you. So now the committee is now required to make a decision on its recommendation to the Mayor as to whether or not the nominee should be appointed as Deputy Chair of Transport for London. Do we have any thoughts, or shall I propose? We have an example of a potential resolution that we could agree or amend or not. The example is that it be agreed to recommend that the Mayor should proceed with his appointment of Seb Dance to the office of Deputy Chair of Transport for London. What are the committee minded to say about that? Apologies, I need to keep an eye on Assemblymember Wilson.
I think I'd be comfortable with that, although I think we heard some really useful commitments today, and I just wonder if we should be minuting the commitments so that the committee can follow up on those over this next 4 years, and whether we need to mention the commitments in our recommendation, but I think that's where I've landed after hearing.
Okay, thank you.
This morning.
Any other thoughts? Assemblymember Cooper?
Thank you. I think I'd probably go along with that. I mean, I'm not a member, as you know, of the Transport Committee, and actually I'm here representing our group because Assemblymember Small Edwards couldn't be here, but certainly you would have heard some of the questions that I was asking, and I do think the answers to everything that we were putting to the Deputy Mayor, we did have some useful pointers towards areas of focus going forward, and I think it might be worth reflecting some of those into a note. But I feel content, certainly, in endorsing what Assemblymember Russell was saying about the appointment and feeling positive that the Deputy Mayor is on top of the brief and going forward would help us move forward in his role as the Deputy Chair of Transport for London.
Thank you, Assemblymember Cooper. Any other thoughts?
I'm going to boringly agree, and then also agree about the importance of the various commitments. I look forward to him coming down and travelling around with me. Apparently, is a new thing we're going to do. We're going to have a buddy system, so I look forward to those journeys. I don't know whether
you shouldn't have mentioned dad and mum taxis, because I think you may end up being a
possibly
Deputy Mayor.
What I'm curious about is when I'm on my Brompton, how that's going to work. Whether he's jogging.
I think we're going to come and take photographs.
But subjects of practical. No, I think joking aside, I think that's fine, and I think probably we do need to have a little think about what those commitments were, because there was a number of them. I mean, visiting outer London boroughs, I think, was an important one. There were numerous commitments that we had, so we might
on the
want to
targets.
I hope one of our diligent people has been making a note.
Yes, the point that Caroline started with, I sort of picked up on, but tried not to go into your next area, but the issue about bringing things forward, and also the point about bringing forward the aim to have the zero emission buses in place by 2030, sort of fully in place by 2030 and not 2034. That was a stretch target that he mentioned at the end, but before that I think there were a number of other things.
Thank you. Assembly Member Wilson, have you got anything to say at this stage? Well, it would be great if we could hear you.
It's the bane of
there you are,
lives.
there you are. Yep, no, you're with us, you're with us.
Not really great extra to add. I think it's a very comprehensive discussion and outline of what the priorities and challenges and opportunities are for the role and for the organisation going forwards. I wouldn't support bringing forward any targets, but that's, as I say, a personal view. But in terms of the overall recommendation to proceed with the appointment, I'm happy to endorse what's already been said.
Okay.
Can I make a quick point on that, actually? Probably the wording of the letter for purposes of diplomacy might be best worded in the structure of we're happy to recommend and these are the commitments that were made to Assembly members during the meeting, without implying that the entire panel agrees with all of the things that were requested as commitments.
I think that would probably be wise, and I think that would be more appropriate for us. So just to reflect back, the suggestion is that we take the resolution that we have and add some, as Assemblyman McGarrett, add some commitments so that they're down in our recommendation. That sounds like we're all on the same page. I'm sure we can work through that wording. I've been told that the transcript will be back tomorrow, so that will aid us, so I don't have to read my own writing, but we will need to get the letter finalised and off by Friday, so just be aware of that for everyone coming back. So can I request the authority be delegated to me to agree with the wording of the letters in consultation with party group lead members? Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much. And a letter will be then sent to the Mayor following this meeting on Friday to confirm the committee's recommendation. And as I have no other business, that concludes today's meeting.
Great.
Thank you.
This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.